How does it feel, Elena, knowing that your only purpose in this family is to be the bridge I walk on to get to the other side? Julian smirked, swirling the expensive Cabernet, the vintage I had paid for, in his crystal glass. The dining room of our family home in Montana felt suffocatingly small. My mother, Margaret, gasped softly, but her eyes remained fixed on her plate, her fingers nervously smoothing the lace tablecloth. My father, Robert, didn't even look up. He just sliced into his medium-rare steak as if my brother had simply commented on the weather. "I'm serious." Julian continued, his voice dripping with Ivy League arrogance sharpened by 3 years of my funding his networking in New York City. "Not everyone is born to lead L. Some people are just born to be the losers who work double shifts at the clinic so the winners can actually change the world. You're basically my personal ATM with a medical degree and a bad haircut. Don't look so offended. It's just a division of labor." A cold, sharp silence followed. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence for them. It was a vacuum that sucked the last bit of oxygen out of my lungs. My heart, which had been racing from a 36-hour shift at the trauma center, suddenly went still. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm tears a roof off its hinges. I whispered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Elena," my mother chimed in, finally looking up. Her voice was that familiar, guilt-soaked velvet. "Julian is under a lot of pressure with his final year at Columbia. He's just blowing off steam. You know you're the strong one. You've always been our rock." "Our rock," I repeated. "Is that what you call a woman who hasn't bought a new pair of shoes in 3 years because her brother needed a wardrobe for his internship? Is that the name for the person who pays the $4,500 monthly rent on a Manhattan loft? She's never even stepped foot in." Julian rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. "Here we go. The martyr act. You love it, don't you? You love being the one everyone depends on because it's the only thing that makes you feel important." "I'm done," I said. It was quiet. It wasn't a scream. It was a fact. "Done with what?" "The salad." My father finally spoke, chuckling as he reached for the salt. "Eat your dinner, Elena. We need to talk about Julian's summer housing in San Francisco. The deposit is due on Friday, $800. We assumed you'd handle the wire transfer like usual." I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had taught me that family was a circle of protection, only to realize I was the only one standing on the outside, holding the shield while they sat inside the warmth. "I am not a rock," I said, standing up so abruptly my chair screeched against the hardwood floor. "And I am certainly not an ATM. Julian, you want to talk about winners and losers? A winner pays his own way. A loser leeches off his sister until she's hollowed out. You think I'm the bridge, fine. I hope you know how to swim because the bridge just collapsed." "Elena, sit down," my mother hissed, her face reddening. "You're embarrassing yourself. Julian is family. We stick together." "No, Mom!" I snapped, my eyes burning with a rage I had suppressed for far too long. "You and Dad stick to me. Julian sticks to my bank account, but from this second forward, the bank is closed. Permanently." Julian laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "You're bluffing. You're too responsible to let me fail. You'd feel too guilty. Go ahead, walk out. You'll be calling me tomorrow to apologize once your big sister instinct kicks back in." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the $1,200 designer hoodie I'd bought him for his birthday. I saw the arrogance in his eyes that I had financed with my own exhaustion. "Don't hold your breath, Julian," I said, grabbing my car keys from the table. "And don't bother calling. I've already blocked your number. Dad. Mom, if you want him to have that San Francisco apartment, sell the horses. I'm going home." Elena, you can't do this, my father roared, finally dropping his fork. I didn't answer. I walked out the front door into the biting Montana wind. My hands were shaking not from the cold, but from the sheer, terrifying rush of freedom. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw Julian standing in the porch light, still holding his wine glass, looking confused rather than worried. He didn't believe me. None of them did. They thought I was the same girl who would always cave. They thought my anger was a flicker that would die out by morning. They didn't realize that tonight I hadn't just walked out of a dinner. I had walked out of a life where I was a secondary character. I checked my phone as I reached the highway. A notification popped up from my banking app, rent payment scheduled, $4,500. With a steady hand and a grim smile, I tapped cancel. Then I hit delete. "Welcome to the real world, Julian," I whispered into the dark cabin of my car. "I hope you like the view from the bottom." The drive back to my apartment was a blur of neon highway lights and the rhythmic thrum of tires against asphalt. For years, that sound had been my lullaby, the soundtrack of a woman who drove between the clinic and her second job as a freelance medical consultant, just to keep the golden child afloat. But tonight, the silence in the car felt like a symphony. I reached my small one-bedroom apartment at 2 a.m. It was a stark contrast to the luxury loft Julian occupied in Soho. My walls were thin, my sofa was a hand-me-down, and the linoleum in the kitchen was peeling at the corners. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my scrubs, and stared at my phone. It was vibrating. Mom, 12 missed calls. Dad, 5 missed calls. Julian, 1 missed call. Blocked. Then the texts started flooding in from my parents. "Elena, stop this madness. Julian is panicking. He has a social mixer tomorrow with potential employers. He needs that money for the suit deposit, Mom. Your mother is crying. Is this how we raised you? To be so transactional with your own blood? Call us now." Dad. I deleted them without reading the rest. Transactional. That was rich coming from the people who treated me like a high-yield savings account. I went to my laptop and opened my spreadsheet. I was a Utah nurse by trade, but I had become an accountant by necessity. The numbers stared back at me cold and unforgiving. In the last 3 years, I had transferred exactly $142,500 to Julian. That didn't include the emergencies, the spring break trips to Cabo he needed for his mental health, or the $400 dinners he put on my credit card because he forgot his wallet. My own savings, $210. I had been one car breakdown away from homelessness while my brother was sipping $18 lattes in a neighborhood I couldn't afford to walk through. A hot, prickly heat climbed up my neck. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a profound, bone-deep resentment. I opened my bank's web portal. I had a joint credit card with Julian, a mistake I'd made when he first moved to New York to help him build credit. I saw a pending charge from 30 minutes ago, $850 at the Marquee Club. He was at a club. Even after the disaster at dinner, even after I told him the bridge had collapsed, he was out spending money that didn't exist. He truly believed I was bluffing. He thought that by the time the charge hit the bank, I would have already caved and transferred the funds to cover it. "Not tonight, Julian," I whispered. I clicked the Report Stolen or Misused button. I froze the account. Then I went a step further. I called the building manager of his Manhattan loft. I had the number saved because I was the one who signed the guarantor forms. "Mr. Henderson, yes, it's Elena Sterling. I'm calling regarding apartment 4B. I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "I am withdrawing my status as a guarantor effective immediately. I understand the lease requires a 30-day notice, but I will not be responsible for any charges incurred after tonight. Yes, I understand he will be served an eviction notice if the rent isn't paid by the 5th. That is perfectly fine. As I hung up, my heart hammered against my ribs. In the world of the Sterlings, I had just committed treason. In Montana, family was everything. But they had forgotten that family is a two-way street, not a one-way extraction. I spent the next hour doing something I should have done years ago. I unlinked my bank accounts from the family's shared portal. I changed my passwords. I even called the dealership where Julian's graduation gift, a sleek Audi I was still paying the monthly installments on, was registered. "I'd like to report a vehicle for repossession," I told the agent. "The primary payer is stopping all payments. Here is the address in New York where the car is located." By 4 a.m., I was exhausted, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel heavy. I felt light. I looked at the mirror in my cramped bathroom. My eyes were bloodshot, and there were dark circles under them that no amount of concealer could hide. "You're a loser, remember?" I told my reflection, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "And losers don't pay for winners' lives." I crawled into bed and slept for 10 hours straight. No alarms, no guilt. I woke up to a voicemail from an unknown New York number. It was Julian. He must have used a friend's phone. "Elena, what the hell is going on? My card just got declined in front of everyone at the club. I had to leave my watch as collateral for the tab, and Henderson just emailed me saying there's an issue with the lease. Call me back right now. This isn't funny anymore." His voice was high-pitched, cracking with a frantic energy I'd never heard before. The winner was starting to realize that his trophy was made of cardboard. I didn't call him back. Instead, I went to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, the expensive kind I usually saved for special occasions, and started looking for a new apartment. A place with a view. A place for a woman who was finally starting her own life. But the peace didn't last long. An hour later, my front door erupted with a violent pounding. "Elena, open this door right now!" My father's voice roared from the hallway. The confrontation wasn't over. It was just moving to my turf. The pounding on the door wasn't just a noise. It was an ultimatum. It was heavy, rhythmic, and saturated with the kind of patriarchal authority my father had used to rule our household since I was a child. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, feeling the heat anchor me to the floor before I walked over and swung the door open. My father Robert stood there, his face a deep shade of crimson that clashed violently with his expensive sheepskin jacket. Behind him, my mother looked like a hollowed-out ghost, her eyes swollen and red from a night of crying. "Have you lost your mind?" my father barked, pushing his way past me into my small living room. He looked around the cramped space with a sneer of disgust. "Julian called us screaming at 5 a.m. He was kicked out of a club like a common criminal because his card was declined. His car is being towed, and Henderson says you canceled the guarantee on his loft. What the hell is wrong with you, Elena?" I closed the door slowly and leaned against it, crossing my arms. I felt a strange, cold detachment. "I told you last night, Dad, the bank is closed. I'm just settling the accounts." "Settling accounts?" my mother wailed, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a life raft. "Elena, he's your brother. He has his finals in 2 weeks. How is he supposed to study if he's worried about being homeless? You're ruining his future out of spite." "His future." I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut the air. "What about my present, Mom? Look at this place. I'm a trauma nurse making 6 figures, and I live like a college student because every extra cent I earn goes to New York. I've sacrificed my entire 20s so Julian could play pretend as a billionaire's son. I have $200 in my savings. He has $3,000 worth of suits in his closet that I paid for." "You have a stable job," my father shouted, stepping into my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. You've always been capable. Julian is different. He has potential, real potential, to put the Sterling name back on the map. You're just being selfish because he said some stupid words at dinner. He's a kid. He's 21. Dad, he's not a kid. And he didn't just say words. He told me exactly how he sees me. I'm the mule. I'm the one who carries the heavy loads so the thoroughbred doesn't have to get his hooves dirty. And you two, you're the ones holding the whip. Enough of this melodrama. Robert slammed his hand down on my small kitchen table, making my coffee mug rattle. You will call the bank. You will unfreeze the card. And you will call Henderson and tell him it was a misunderstanding. Now. I stared at him. For 27 years, that tone would have made me flinch. It would have made me apologize just to keep the peace, to keep the family together. But today, it felt like static noise. No, I said. It was the shortest, most powerful word I had ever spoken. What did you say to me? I said no. And if you're so worried about his rent, Dad, why don't you pay it? Oh, wait, I forgot. You tapped into your retirement fund to buy that new tractor, and the ranch hasn't turned a profit in 3 seasons. You're broke, aren't you? That's Taisao, you're here. You need my money to keep up the illusion of your success. My father's hand twitched, his eyes widening in shock. You ungrateful bitch, he hissed. After everything we did for you, we gave you a home, we supported you. I had a full scholarship, Dad, I reminded him coldly. And I worked at the diner every weekend to pay for my own books. You didn't give me a home. You gave me a list of chores and a sense of debt that I've spent the last decade trying to pay off. Well, the debt is paid, in full. If you walk away from us now, my father said, his voice low and dangerous, as he stood in the doorway. Don't ever think about coming back to the ranch. You're no longer a Sterling. I've been on my own since I was 18, Robert, I replied, looking him straight in the eye. You're just finally acknowledging it. Get out. I shut the door and locked it. I heard him shouting in the hallway for another minute before their footsteps finally faded away. I sank to the floor, my back against the wood, and let out a breath that felt like a decade's worth of oxygen. My phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification, Julian Sterling is excited to announce his summer internship at Goldman & Associates, #grind, #success. I looked at the post, then at my bank balance. A slow, dark smile spread across my face. Your turn to grind, Julian, I whispered. I opened my laptop and began to draft an email to the HR department of a certain firm in San Francisco. The hospital was the only place where the chaos of my life felt manageable. In the ER, blood was just a fluid to be contained, and pain was a symptom to be suppressed. But as I scrubbed in for my shift, my mind kept drifting back to the email I'd sent to San Francisco. I had pulled the loose thread. Now I was waiting for the entire tapestry to unravel. Elena, you okay? You're staring at that soap like it's going to give you the winning lottery numbers. Sarah, a fellow nurse, nudged me with her elbow. Just a long night, Sarah, I lied, forcing a smile. Family drama. Ah, say no more. My brother once stole my identity to buy a jet ski. Families are just organized crime units with better holiday photos. I laughed, but it felt hollow. My family wasn't just a crime unit. They were a cult of personality, and I had just set fire to their golden idol. Around midnight, during a rare lull in the trauma bay, my phone vibrated frantically in my locker. 34 missed calls, 52 unread texts. Most were from my mother, a frantic mix of pleas and vitriol. But one text from an unknown New York number stopped my heart. This is Julian's roommate, Marcus. Elena pickup. The repo guys took the Audi, and Julian is losing it. He trashed the living room, and the landlord called the cops to evict him tonight. He has nowhere to go. This is messed up. I stared at the screen. A part of me, the mule, felt a sharp pang of guilt. It was the middle of the week in Manhattan. Julian was essentially being thrown onto the street in his designer pajamas. But then I remembered him swirling that wine, calling me a loser, while I calculated how many more night shifts I needed to pay for his ego. The guilt died instantly. When my shift ended at 7 a.m., the sun was beginning to bleed over the Montana mountains. I walked to my car, my bones aching, and finally checked my email. There was a response from Goldman and Associates. Dear Ms. Sterling, professional integrity and financial stability are core requirements for our program. We are conducting an internal review of Mr. Sterling's application. Regards, HR Department. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. I had just cost him the only thing he actually valued: his status. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I saw a familiar beat-up truck. It was my cousin Silas, the only one who didn't worship at the altar of Julian. "They're coming for you, Elle," he said without a greeting. "Julian caught a red-eye this morning. He used his last few bucks for a standby ticket. Uncle Robert told him you were just having a tantrum and that a face-to-face would fix it." "Let him come," I said, my voice hardening. "I've changed the locks on more than just the door, Silas." I went upstairs, my heart drumming a war beat. 2 hours later, the elevator groaned. Footsteps approached, heavy, erratic, desperate. Then the pounding started. "Elena! Elena, open the door!" Julian's voice was hoarse, stripped of its New York polish. I didn't move. I sat in the shadows of my living room, watching the door handle jiggle. "Elena, please, they took the car. I'm being evicted. Goldman called. They told me not to come. My life is over. You have to fix this. You're my sister." When I didn't answer, he started kicking the wood. "Open the damn door, you selfish bitch. You're ruining everything." "All because of one dinner. You're a nobody. You're nothing without this family." I stood up slowly, walked to the door, and spoke through the wood. "If I'm a nobody, Julian, then why are you begging at my feet?" The kicking stopped. "Elena," he whispered, "I have nowhere to go. Dad won't help. He says he's tapped out. Just $10,000. That's all I need for the SF deposit. I'll pay you back, I swear." $10,000. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up. "That's 5 months of my life, Julian. 5 months of cleaning up blood and watching people die. You want me to give you 5 more months of my life for a start? You've already wasted 3 times over." "Go away, or I call the police." "You wouldn't." I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and held it to the door so he could hear the operator's voice. I heard him scramble back, cursing my name with a hatred that proved I had finally done the right thing. I sat back down in the silence. The house of cards hadn't just fallen. It had been pulverized. The week following Julian's desperate arrival was a descent into a different kind of war, one of social attrition. In a small Montana town, reputation wasn't just a luxury. It was the currency everyone traded in. By Monday morning, the local grapevine was buzzing with the story of the ungrateful Sterling daughter who had abandoned her brother and ruined his career. I walked into the local grocery store, my head held high despite the exhaustion. The whisper started the moment the bell above the door chimed. Mrs. Gable, a woman who had known me since I was in diapers, looked away as I passed the produce aisle. At the checkout, Tommy, a teenager I had treated for a nasty gash in the ER just last month, wouldn't meet my eyes. "That'll be $42, Elena," he muttered. "Is there a problem, Tommy?" I asked. "My mom said, well, she said what you did to Julian was cold. Family is family, right?" I took my bags, looking him straight in the eye. "Family is supposed to be a support system, Tommy, not a parasite. Remember that when you're older." I left the store feeling the weight of the town's judgment, but it didn't crush me. For the first time, their opinions felt like shadows, dark, but lacking substance. When I got home, there was a box on my doorstep. No return address. Inside were my old high school yearbooks, childhood photos, and my nursing graduation gown. They had been shoved in with no care. The glass on one frame was shattered. On top was a note from my father. "Since you don't need us, we don't need the clutter. Don't come back for the rest. It's going to the dump." I sat on my floor looking at the broken glass. A single tear escaped, but I wiped it away. This was the love I had been paying for. It was a trade my money for their approval. Now that the money had stopped, the approval had vanished. My phone buzzed. It was a link to a TikTok video from my cousin Silas. I clicked it. It was Julian. He was sitting in a dim motel room, a single lamp casting dramatic shadows. "I never thought I'd be in this position," he said to the camera, his voice shaking with practiced emotion. "When your own blood turns their back on you just as you're about to reach your dreams, it changes you. Some people can't stand to see you win, even if they're your own sister. To everyone with a toxic family member, stay strong." The comments were a bloodbath. "How could she? She sounds like a monster. Success is the best revenge." He didn't mention the $142,500. He didn't mention calling me a loser. He had edited the truth to fit his narrative. I felt a surge of indignation, then a cold realization he was playing his last card. He was fishing for sympathy because his kingdom was gone. I didn't reply. I did something much more damaging. I called my lawyer, Mr. Vance. "I want to proceed with a formal demand for repayment on the personal loans I made to Julian," I said. "I have the transfer records and the texts where he promised to pay me back. If he can't pay, I want a legal judgment." "Elena, this will show up on every credit check he ever runs for a finance job," Mr. Vance warned. "He told me he was a winner," I replied. "It's time he started paying the winner's price." That evening, a soft, hesitant tap came at my door. It was my mother. She looked older, stripped of her usual jewelry. "Elena," she whispered, "Julian is at a Motel 6. Your father won't speak to him because he's ashamed. Please, just give him enough for a flight back to New York to get his things." "He has his own hands, Mom. He can work for a ticket." "He's fragile. You've always been the strong one. Why can't you just be strong for him one last time?" "Because being strong for him has made me broke, Mom. If he's fragile, let him break. Maybe he'll grow back stronger." I started to close the door, but she grabbed my arm. "If he does something to himself, it will be on your head." I looked at the woman who had watched me exhaust myself for years without once asking if I was okay. "If he chooses that it's his choice, Mom, I am not his keeper." I closed the door. The harvest was bitter, but for the first time, I wasn't hungry for their crumbs. 2 weeks had passed since the motel confrontation, and the silence from the Sterling Ranch was deafening. I spent my days at the clinic burying myself in the clinical precision of medicine. It was easier to fix a shattered femur than a shattered family, but the piece was a thin veneer. One Tuesday afternoon, while I was charting in the break room, my phone buzzed with an email from an unfamiliar law firm in New York. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. "Dear Ms. Sterling, we represent the management of the Hudson Heights Lofts. As the primary guarantor for Julian Sterling, you are hereby notified of a pending suit for property damages exceeding $15,000 plus unpaid rent." Attached were photos. My breath hitched. Julian hadn't just moved out. He had waged a war of spite. The white marble countertops, the ones I'd paid a premium for, were stained with red wine and cigarette burns. The designer wallpaper was shredded. The electronics were smashed. A loser's money had built that nest, and he had destroyed it rather than let it be returned in peace. "Elena, you're turning blue," Sarah said, leaning over my shoulder. She saw the screen and winced. "Oh, honey, that's not a messy exit. That's a middle finger in high definition." "He wants to bleed me dry one last time," I whispered. "Don't let him. You canceled that guarantee, right?" "I did, but legally, I'm still on the hook for damages incurred during the notice period." I didn't cry. I felt a cold, predatory focus take over. Julian thought he was being clever playing the victim on TikTok while sabotaging my life from afar. I called the firm immediately. "This is Elena Sterling," I said, my voice as sharp as a scalpel. "Before we discuss a settlement, I want the security footage from the 48 hours prior to the eviction. If that footage shows Julian intentionally destroying the property after he received my withdrawal notice, I will not only refuse to pay, but I will also testify against him in a criminal proceeding." The lawyer hesitated. "I see. We will look into the timeline." An hour later, Marcus Julian's former roommate finally called me. He sounded terrified. "Elena, I tried to stop him. He went into a trance screaming about how you stole his life. He invited random people over and told them to go wild. He said, 'Elena has deep pockets, let her pay for the party.'" "Did you record it, Marcus?" "Yeah, I have a video of him throwing a chair through the TV. I was scared to send it." "Send it now. I'll make sure the lawyers leave you out of it." 10 minutes later, the video arrived. There was Julian, the golden child, laughing like a maniac as he poured champagne over the sound system. "Charge it to the ATM," he shouted at the camera. I watched it 3 times. The last of my big sister instinct flickered and died. That evening, I drove to the Motel 6. I saw my father's truck hidden in the back corner. I walked up to room 214 and knocked. My father opened the door, smelling of cheap whiskey. Julian was slumped on the bed, staring at the TV. He looked up, a smug smirk forming. "Back to apologize, Elle. Did the lawyers scare you?" Julian asked. "I told you I'm the investment. You can't just walk away from the bill." I didn't say a word. I turned my phone around and pressed play. The smirk vanished. The room went silent, save for the sound of Julian on screen shouting, "Charge it to the ATM!" My father stared at the screen, his jaw dropping. "Julian," my father whispered, "you did this? You told us the landlord's thugs did this to intimidate you." "He lied, Robert," I said, "just like he lied about everything else. I've already sent this to the New York Police Department. Since the damages are over $1,500, it's a felony." Julian's face went white. You called the cops on your own brother?" "No," I corrected. "I called the cops on a criminal who tried to steal $15,000 from me." I looked at my father, who was sitting with his head in his hands. "You can stay here with your winner dad. I'm going home." As I walked out, I heard my father finally start to shout not at me, but at Julian. For the first time in 21 years, the golden child was defenseless. The fallout from the motel confrontation hit the Sterling family like a flash flood. Within 48 hours, the NYPD had issued a warrant for Julian's arrest regarding the felony criminal mischief. He couldn't run. He had no car, no money, and his face was already plastered across local social media as the golden boy turned vandal. I sat in my apartment staring at a stack of legal documents. My lawyer, Mr. Vance, had been busy. We weren't just defending against the New York lawsuit. We were countersuing. I was seeking a full clawback of the funds Julian had obtained under false pretenses, specifically the educational expenses he had diverted to bottle service and designer clothes. A knock came at the door. I checked the peephole. It was Silas. I let him in, and he looked like he'd just come from a funeral. "It's getting ugly, Elle," Silas said, dropping into my chair. "Uncle Robert is trying to mortgage the ranch to pay for Julian's bail. and a New York defense attorney. Aunt Margaret is selling her engagement ring. They're convinced that if they can just fix this one last mess, Julian can still have a life. They're pouring water into a bucket with no bottom, I said, leaning against the counter. Did they ask you for money? Yeah, Robert called me this morning, said it was my family duty. I told him my duty was to my own kids, not to a cousin who thinks a marble countertop is a chalkboard. He called me a traitor and hung up. Silas looked at me with a mixture of pity and admiration. You really did it, Elle. You broke the cycle. I didn't break it, Silas. I just stopped being the engine that kept it running. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. I knew it was the motel. I let it go to voicemail. Elena, it's me. My mother's voice was barely a whisper broken by jagged sobs. He's gone. Julian ran. He took your father's truck and whatever cash was in his wallet. The police are at the motel now. Your father he's in shock. Please, Elena, he's your brother. If the police find him, his life is over. Tell them you'll pay the $15,000. If the debt is settled, maybe the charges will go away. Please, for the love of God, save him. I listened to the message twice. The old Elena, the girl who used to cry when Julian scraped his knee, felt a ghost of a heartbeat. But the woman I had become, the one who had survived the trauma ward and the betrayal, remained cold. Save him? He had already saved himself into a corner. I called the local sheriff's office. This is Elena Sterling. I'm reporting a stolen vehicle. A silver 2022 Ford F-150. My father, Robert Sterling, is the owner, but he's currently incapacitated by distress at the Motel 6. The suspect is Julian Sterling. He is likely heading toward the interstate. We already have the warrant from New York on our system, Elena, the deputy replied. We'll put out an APB. An hour later, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Julian. He must have stolen a burner phone or borrowed one from a gas station. I hate you. I hope you rot in that tiny apartment with your miserable life. You think you're better than us? You're just a bitter, lonely nurse who couldn't handle seeing someone actually fly. I'll be back, Elena. And when I am, I'm going to take everything you ever worked for. I didn't block the number. I forwarded the text directly to the sheriff. Around 3:00 a.m., my phone rang again. This time I answered. It was Silas. They caught him, Elle. He tried to outrun a cruiser near the border. He totaled the truck into a ditch. He's alive, but he's in handcuffs. Robert is down at the station losing his mind. Was anyone else hurt? I asked, my voice flat. No. Just the truck and Julian's pride. I closed my eyes. Thanks for telling me, Silas. Are you going down there? No, I have a shift at 6 a.m. There are people at the clinic who actually want to get better. Julian just wants to stay the same. I hung up and walked to my window. The Montana sky was vast and indifferent. For years I had thought the world would end if I stopped carrying my family. I thought the sky would fall if I said no. But the stars were still there. The earth was still turning. I went to my desk and opened my condo savings folder. I added the $4,500 I hadn't spent on Julian's rent this month. The number was growing. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. It represented every hour of sleep I'd lost, every patient I'd comforted, and every mile I'd driven. It was the price of my soul, and I was finally buying it back. I realized then that Julian wasn't the only one being repossessed. I was repossessing myself. I laid down and slept deep, dreamless sleep until my alarm woke me for work. The loser had a shift to start, and for the first time, I couldn't wait to get to work. The news of Julian's arrest and the totaled truck spread through our town faster than a winter flu. By the time I arrived at the clinic for my morning shift, the atmosphere had shifted again. The judgmental whispers had been replaced by a heavy, awkward silence. People didn't know where to look. I was no longer just the ungrateful daughter. I was the woman who had effectively put her own brother in a cell. I was in the middle of redressing a post-op wound when my supervisor, Dr. Miller, signaled me into his office. He looked concerned, holding a local newspaper that featured a small blurb about the interstate chase. "Elena, I've had 3 calls this morning from concerned citizens asking if we really want someone so embroiled in legal drama representing our clinic," he said, sighing. I felt my heart sink. "Dr. Miller, I haven't broken a single law. I'm a victim of financial fraud and property damage. My family's choices are not my own." He held up a hand. "I know that. I've watched you work for 5 years. You're the best nurse we have. But the Sterling name is becoming toxic in this county. I'm not firing you, but I'm suggesting you take a few weeks of paid leave. Let the dust settle. Go somewhere where nobody knows your last name." I wanted to fight it to scream that I shouldn't have to hide for the sins of a man-child. But as I looked at my reflection in the glass of his office door, pale, hollow-eyed, and vibrating with suppressed rage, I realized he was right. I was exhausted. I took the leave, but I didn't hide. I drove straight to the county jail. I needed to see the winner one last time before the New York authorities extradited him. After an hour of waiting in a room that smelled of industrial bleach and despair, Julian was led in behind a plexiglass barrier. He looked pathetic. His designer hoodie was stained with mud and blood from the crash, and his right arm was in a cheap sling. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, jagged desperation that made him look younger and older all at once. "Are you happy now?" he spat the moment he sat down. "You got what you wanted. I'm a felon. I'm ruined. Does that make you feel like a winner, Elena?" "I don't feel like anything, Julian," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'm just here to drop off a gift." I slid a manila envelope into the transfer slot. He opened it with his good hand, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. It wasn't money. It was a formal, itemized invoice of every dollar I had spent on him over the last 3 years, backed by bank statements and a signed affidavit from my lawyer. At the bottom was the total $157,500, including the new damages to the loft. "What is this?" "That is the price of your ego," I said. "My lawyer has already filed this with the court. Since you have no assets, the judge is looking into a restitution order. Every cent you earn for the rest of your life, whether it's flipping burgers or making license plates in prison, a portion will be garnished and sent to me until that balance is 0. Julian let out a hysterical, choked laugh. "I'm never going to pay you back. I'll just declare bankruptcy." "You can't discharge a debt tied to criminal restitution for intentional damage, Julian. I checked. This follows you to the grave." I leaned in closer to the glass. "You called me a loser because I worked 2 jobs. Well, now you're going to work for me. You're my longest-running investment, and I'm finally collecting my dividends." "You're a monster," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears of self-pity. "No, I'm just the bridge you burned. I hope you're enjoying the water." I stood up and walked out without looking back. As I crossed the parking lot, I saw my mother sitting in her car, staring at the jail entrance. She looked like a skeleton. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. We were strangers now, bound only by a shared history of enabling a ghost. I went back to my apartment and did something I hadn't done in years. I packed a suitcase, not with scrubs or work boots, but with sundresses and books. I booked a flight to a small town in Oregon, a place with no ranches, no golden boys, and no Sterlings. Before I left, I checked my condo account one last time. I had enough for a down payment now. Not in Montana. Somewhere new. As the plane lifted off the runway, I looked down at the sprawling brown hills of the ranch country. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of the mountains on my shoulders. I felt the air beneath my wings. The ATM was officially out of service, and the woman who owned the account was finally going home to a home she had built for herself. The news of Julian's arrest spread through our town faster than a winter flu. By the time I arrived at the clinic for my morning shift, the atmosphere had shifted. The judgmental whispers were replaced by a heavy, awkward silence. People didn't know where to look. I was no longer the ungrateful daughter. I was the woman who had put her own brother in a cell. I was redressing a post-op wound when my supervisor, Dr. Miller, signaled me into his office. He looked concerned, holding a local newspaper. "Elena, I've had 3 calls this morning from concerned citizens asking if we want someone so embroiled in legal drama representing our clinic," he said, sighing. I felt my heart sink. "Dr. Miller, I'm a victim of financial fraud. My family's choices are not my own." He held up a hand. "I know that. You're the best nurse we have, but the Sterling name is becoming toxic in this county. I'm not firing you, but take a few weeks of paid leave. Let the dust settle. Go somewhere where nobody knows your last name." I wanted to fight it, but as I looked at my reflection, pale and hollow-eyed, I realized he was right. I was exhausted. I took the leave. But I didn't hide. I drove to the county jail to see the winner one last time before his extradition to New York. Julian sat behind the plexiglass looking pathetic. His designer hoodie was stained, and his right arm was in a cheap sling. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, jagged desperation. "Are you happy now?" he spat. "I'm a felon. Does that make you feel like a winner, Elena?" "I don't feel like anything, Julian," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'm just here to drop off a gift." I slid a manila envelope into the transfer slot. It wasn't money. It was an itemized invoice of every dollar I had spent on him over the last 3 years, totaling $157,500. "What is this?" "That is the price of your ego," I said. "My lawyer has filed this with the court. Every cent you earn for the rest of your life, whether flipping burgers or making license plates in prison, a portion will be garnished and sent to me until that balance is 0. You called me a loser because I worked 2 jobs. Well, now you're going to work for me." "You're a monster," he whispered. "No, I'm just the bridge you burned. Enjoy the water." I walked out without looking back. As I crossed the parking lot, I saw my mother sitting in her car, staring at the jail. She looked like a skeleton. We were strangers now, bound only by a shared history of enabling a ghost. I went home, packed a suitcase, and booked a flight to Oregon. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at the brown hills of Montana. I didn't feel the weight of the mountains anymore. I felt the air. The ATM was officially out of service, and I was finally going home to a home I had built for myself. 6 months later, the air in Portland smelled of pine and rain, a sharp and refreshing contrast to the dusty, stifling heat of Montana. I sat on the balcony of my new condo, a modest but sun-drenched space, with hardwood floors and a view of the Willamette River. The keys felt warm and solid in my pocket, a physical manifestation of the boundary I had finally drawn around my own life. My phone buzzed on the bistro table. It was an automated notification from my bank. Deposit received $112.40. Source: New York State Department of Corrections. Restitution Fund. I stared at the number. It wasn't much, but it was the most honest money Julian had ever given me. It represented hours of him working in a prison laundry room or a kitchen, finally learning the value of the grind he had once mocked. In New York, he had pleaded guilty to felony criminal mischief. His Ivy League dreams were gone, replaced by a 5-year probation and a permanent record, that ensured no high finance firm would ever let him pass the lobby. I took a sip of my coffee, expensive, ethically sourced, and paid for entirely by me, and opened a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from Silas. "The ranch is up for sale, L," he wrote. "Robert couldn't keep up with the legal fees or the interest on the tractor loan. They're moving into a small rental in town. Margaret asks about you sometimes, but mostly they just sit in silence. Julian calls them collect every week, crying about the food and the people. They still think you're the villain, but out here, the rest of us are finally breathing again." I folded the letter and set it aside. I didn't feel a surge of triumph, nor did I feel a sting of guilt. I felt clean. The villain in their story was the hero in her own, and that was a trade I would make every single day for the rest of my life. I had a shift at the city hospital starting in 2 hours. I wasn't the mule anymore. I was a senior charge nurse. I didn't take double shifts because someone else needed a vacation. I took them because I was saving for a trip to Italy, a trip where I would be the only one on the itinerary. My phone rang. It was a local number. "Hello, this is Elena." "Hi, Ms. Sterling. This is the community garden coordinator. Your application for a plot was approved. You can start planting this weekend." "That's wonderful," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "I'll be there." I looked out at the river, watching the water flow steadily toward the ocean. For years, I had tried to hold back the tide of my family's failures, nearly drowning in the process. Now I just let it flow. I was no longer a bridge, an ATM, or a backup plan. I was Elena. I was stable. I was free. I picked up my bag and headed toward the door. I had a life to live, and for the first time, the balance was exactly where it needed to be. Family is everything, but don't let family become an excuse for people to bleed you dry. Helping out is one thing, but carrying someone else's entire life on your back only teaches them how to be a parasite. Remember, you aren't a villain for setting boundaries or saying no to people who only call when they need money. Choose yourself for once, because if you don't value your own hard work, nobody else will. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of Elena's journey. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone, please drop a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to follow so you don't miss out on our upcoming stories. See you in the next one.